Well, perhaps by this time you've looked at the front of your bulletin and wondered why there are Christmas trees there. And you'd be partway right. These are balsam trees on the front of your bulletin, the ones that have that wonderful smell at Christmas. And the other thing the balsam trees give us is that balm you just heard about, both in the reading and in the psalm. They balm from Gilead. The one that is supposed to soothe the sin-sick soul, as the old hymn goes that Tim just sang. The one that was in the reading Gary just gave. So it seems as if in these crazy times, dishonest people have the advantage over the moral ones. Feels that way. We sure could use a balm to soothe us. The truth is, in this supposed post-pandemic time, if we're honest with ourselves, we are not okay. We are not okay. And things are not fine inside our souls, and not yet. We need to admit this in order to know where to start to apply the balm. On top of that, if we're parents or grandparents who only want to help our kids grow and with a sense of morality, how do we possibly teach our children honesty when the whole world seems to think it's okay to cheat? Think of the things you've read this week in the news. Think of the shipment of children and families to Martha's Vineyard unannounced, with the illusion that they're going to get jobs and a place to live. Some of what the kids need to learn, and they'll learn in church school now that we're returning to that. But the biggest lesson in honesty will come from you. I know that sometimes parents are amazed at how easy it is for kids to lie. From little lies to really big ones. How on earth did they get this way, we'll ask. But think about it. How many times have some of us used our kids to tell a little fib? I'll give you an example. The home phone rings. The home phone rings. Dad realizes there's someone on the other line he really doesn't want to get involved with at that time because he's busy. So your kid answers the phone and tells you it's for you. And you answer, "Tell him I'm not home." You just had your child lie. Lesson number 1 in fibbing. There's a great group that I've run in called All Pro Dad, that aims to help especially fathers to know how to shape their children into strong adults. One of the things that All Pro Dads teach us is that goodness is a willingness to choose what is right, loving, even if it's difficult. That's a tall order. It may seem like a little thing, but it's the little fibs that you teach your kids to tell that tells them that honesty is really not a big thing. Of the 10 ways that All Pro Dads recommends to teach your kids to be honest, model the truth. Model the truth is a big one. They say, you are the role model. You do not want your child to hear you telling a lie. Live by the truth. If your children see you telling even harmless white lies, it'll feel like it's okay. When they get in the habit of telling small lies, it leads to a habit of telling big ones. That includes things like stating insincere compliments to people, or even worse, being honest about your own feelings on a regular basis. Because you think that you're shielding them from your own feelings because it'll make your child feel more secure. That's not the case. In the immortal words of that biblical scholar, Judge Judy, she said, if you tell the truth, you don't have as much to remember about what you lied about. And if your child has gotten really good at lying, she says, How can you tell when a kid's lying? Because their lips are moving. But seriously, when we keep telling our kids that things are just fine when they're not, we're not fooling them. Ask any kid who's gone through a divorce. They know. We're sending signals when we say things are just fine, that emotions like sadness, fear, and weeping are somehow never to be displayed. And we tell our children that emotions are a sign of weakness when we're not honest about our own feelings. I want us to return to that one point we mentioned about being dishonest about our own feelings. The fact is, we don't know what to do with the way we feel often. And we pretend, even to ourselves, that things are okay. But it's not okay. It's not even okay with God that way. If we're honest with God, then we're not afraid to lament, which is what you heard this morning was a lament. Jeremiah paved the way for us, telling us that the language of lament is raw and honest. Tom Wright's a great biblical scholar, and he has to remind us modern people that lament is a form of praise. And in the Bible, the greatest number of psalms are all laments. They're there for a reason. When we cry out to God, it's proof that a relationship exists with God and ourselves, a pathway to intimacy with God. Lament is a prayer to God. Complaining about how we feel is a prayer to God. And most importantly, we forget this, it's participation in the pain of others. You see, the balm in Gilead is healing is in fact not a salve, but it's one another. One another. But that means we must make room to listen when someone trusts us with their words of pain. And in our Yankee conservative, keep calm and carry on, we can shut people down because we're not comfortable with their sorrow. Some years ago, I was leading a retreat for the Women's Fellowship down at Second Congregational Church. And there were 16 of us, including one woman, Yvonne, who had lost her husband some 4 years before. Every time she got together with the women, she would get very, very weepy. The day of the retreat was no exception. So at one point, one of the exasperated women pulled me aside privately and said, "We're all so tired of this. He died 4 years ago. That's too long a time to still be grieving. Get her to stop." Of course, there is no approved time schedule for when you stop grieving. It is what it is. Grieving is what it must be. Grief takes as long as grief takes, and it's not a straight line. But the pain and progress of reaching a new normal can be reached far easier when someone is willing to listen to one's lament. I told the group that after lunch we would sit on the lawn and invite Yvonne to tell us a bit about her husband. This had never been done. She had never been asked to do this and only kept apologizing for crying. So when Yvonne began to tell her story, she related how they both loved traveling. And especially they loved, one of their favorite places was Turkey. And she shared some memories, some wonderful memories of their time there and what they'd seen and what they'd done. And interestingly enough, she stopped crying. In fact, she started smiling as she shared their escapades, and so did the other women, some of whom were widows themselves. They were moved to have, for the first time, a sense of her loss. Why was she grieving? And then one of the women suggested, Yvonne, why don't you go back to Turkey with your grown son and go share some of those marvelous things that you did there with him? In fact, that's what happened. A year later, she was back with the fellowship, and she told them about the marvelous trip she had with her son. The days of apologizing for her tears were over, because God had sent her away to grow beyond the loss, to know what a blessed life she'd had with her husband, and she could celebrate it. If we seek to live with honesty in our lives, while the world finds new and creative ways to be dishonest, we also need to be honest with God when things are not okay. In his book, It's Okay Not to Be Okay, by Federico Villanueva, he tells us this. He asks a question. He says, do you feel down today? The good news is you don't have to pretend you are not. Like the psalmist, you can actually say, my soul is downcast. It's okay. It's okay to be down. It's okay to admit we are down a little or a lot. Most importantly, it's okay to come to God when we are down, especially when we are down. For as we have learned, even God's people, including Jesus, experience being down. Especially when it comes to our children. There's nothing as important as having your child feel free to tell you when they're not okay, when they're depressed or they're being bullied, and most of all, if they're so depressed, they feel like they cannot go on. If we model our willingness to speak the words of our sadness, even our anger, our children will realize their feelings are as important as anybody's. Being down is not always an indication that something is wrong with us. Psalm 42 tells us that being down can be an indication of growing intimacy with God. Despite living in a world when political candidates lie to injure their opponents, the 43rd Psalm tells us this as I close out. Vindicate me, my God, and plead my cause against an unfaithful nation. Rescue me from those who are deceitful and wicked. You are God, my stronghold. You are God, my stronghold. And that's okay for me. Amen.
What does the Lord require for praise and offering? What sacrifice desire or tribute did you bring? To justice, love, and mercy walk humbly with your God. People of earth, give ear. Should you not justice know? Will God your pleading hear? While crime and cruelty grow, to justice, love, and mercy walk humbly with your God.
So I send you forth. I send you forth into a world that doesn't seem to value trust, not trust, but truth anymore. Where honesty sometimes seems like a liability, but in the eyes of God and us, it's the one thing that keeps us whole and in connection with what Jesus has taught us. So we ask you this week to look around you, look inside of you, start with you. Are there some dark places inside? Maybe a little shady, maybe deep. Are there senses of loss? Because things are different than they were in 2020. Are there things that you ought to be honest that you're dealing with? And I ask you to put those forth to God. Lie in bed at night. Ask God to be with you. And listen. Listen to what God has to say to you. And for the rest of the week, also look for other people who may be hurting and be able to give them a bit of your own light. Because that's what we are supposed to be. We are supposed to be light bearers. Just like the Saint Christopher was a light bearer. We're meant to carry light to other people. May God bless you and keep you all this week and touch your soul and touch your soul and you touch other souls. Amen.